Hello, welcome back to my channel. It is me, MsNoBuntu, a divinely inspired, vibrantly anointed artist, and it is Sunday or Monday, so you know what time it is. I am reviewing season 7, episode 4 of Iyanla, Fix My Life, and let's get into this episode without any further delay. So it's a pretty sunny day where I am, so I look red from behind. Look at my ears. But anyway, we shall go on. So this episode is about a man, 40-year-old man. Terell was adopted and has just recently, in his 39th year, found his original family. And he finds his original mom and his sisters, and but you know, it's trying to consolidate these broken pieces of the experience of being adopted, and also the broken pieces of now having found both sides of his makeup, and in terms of who brought him up and who brought him into the world, and trying to bring them together. Okay, so there are about 10 segments this time around. Of course, Iyanla meets with Terell to hear his story and his experience of what life has been, knowing that he grew up obviously adopted. Second segment is adoptive mother and Iyanla speaking how it came to be that her and her husband decided to adopt. Third segment is with two of the sisters. He's got more sisters, but two sisters agreed to come, Alex and Angelica. And Iyanla meets with these two sisters. The fourth segment, Iyanla meets with the mother, their biological mother. Sixth segment meets with the sisters and the brother, and then it is the sisters, the brother, and the mom, and then it is the adopted mom and Iyanla, and then it is the two moms, and then lastly it is the village. Okay, let me start. So Iyanla meets with Terell to find out the circumstances around which he came to discover his original mom, his biological mom. And then he tells a story of how he had been looking and they had been looking, and they eventually found each other, and within an hour of kind of finding each other, the whole family was then calling, the original family was calling. And it's clear from the interaction, or from him telling how the whole story came about, that led him to writing to Iyanla to ask for help in having these conversations with their adoptive and biological parents in order to put his life pieces together. It comes out, that there is this relationship that he has with his adoptive mom, great relationship, but his original mom, he describes his experience of his original mom as, kind of offensive sometimes. Like, she'll say, you're my child, and even though you were raised by her, if I would have raised you, you're my child, I didn't want to give you away, and if I would have raised you, you wouldn't have turned out gay, because Terell is, a 40-year-old, gay man on top of all these other pieces. And it, I found that very interesting in the sense of how, people who tend to fail you and abandon you also have this strange sense of ownership over you. And I found that interesting, and it's what, parents will do sometimes. They'll fail you, or they'll abandon you, or they'll, not be there for you in ways that you need them to be, and you figure it out on your own. And when you are at the tail end of sorting things out and having figured things out, they want to claim undue credit. This mom is saying, oh, that's not your biological mom, and had I brought you up, but you didn't, you gave him away, and he's brought up by somebody else, so you don't get to even picture how you would have brought him up. You gave him away, and then you don't get to picture that and then take a jab at the person who fed him, clothed him, educated him, him, nurtured him all these years after you gave him away, and then throw a jab and say, well, had I brought him up, he wouldn't have turned out gay. Okay, was he hungry? Did he not have clothes? Did he grow up in dysfunction? None of those things. But you want to focus on, oh, but he wouldn't have turned out gay. And I understand her, and I can absolutely stand with her on her beliefs, but to skip all the good things that were done, and you zoom in on one thing that, well, if I would have brought him up, which you didn't because you gave that right up willingly, then he wouldn't have been gay. So I thought, again, it took me back to, okay, there's this thing that when people, grown parents, do, that they take undue, ownership of their children that they failed, their children that they've abandoned. Now you begin to achieve some things on your own. Now you begin to undo some things on your own, not with their help, not with their assistance, but they want to claim undue credit, undue ownership of your stuff. That's what came up for me in this segment with just Iyanla meeting with Terell. Also, Iyanla then says, okay, for every 7 years of your life until you're 40, I want to give words to how you felt in the 7-year cycles, or 0 to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 21, etc. And so Terell does this and puts words, there's pictures of him at every one of those 7-year to represent every one of those 7-year cycles of his life, of his 40 years. And then he now has to put words to how he felt through, how did you feel between 0 and 7, 7 and 14, 14 to 21, 21 to 28, and so on. And it creates a picture then later for his biological mom to let her know, this is how I felt while you were gone, while you were not in my life, and I was being brought up by somebody else whom you gave me away to. So there's words, obviously, like being abandoned, feeling lost, feeling alone, all along that chart of those years that represent 40 years in 7-year periods. And I thought that was a brilliant idea, in the sense of, when now the biological mother, because the biological mother was met with Iyanla in that room where that illustration was. And now the biological mother was looking at this illustration of every 7 years, how this child that you gave away felt lost, abandoned, failed, like they didn't have anyone, like, who am I? They don't know themselves. They feel a sense of not being, having any foundation, The mother got to see that, the biological mother got to see that, because then, it's fine to imagine what it feels like, but it's another thing when you actually see it, you see the pictures, and then you see the words associated to the emotions of how he felt in all that time that he was having to grow up without his biological mother, and how that made him feel. Okay, also I had to change my angle because the light is going down very quick suddenly. There's this safe behind me, but we're gonna be okay. All right, so next up, Iyanla meets the adoptive mother and father, just to find out the story of how they came to then adopt this young man, along with obviously another child, and how, I guess that's something unusual 40 years ago, to a Black family adopting, nothing particularly there came up. But I would say the one thing that came up that was imperative for the process is that, Iyanla said, now that he's found his biological mother and family of sisters and brothers and whoever else is there on the biological side, he needs to know that he can ask all the questions he needs to ask the biological parents as well as the adoptive parents, in helping him to clarify all the emotions that are causing him to feel lost, or whatever kind of unsettlement that he feels about these different pieces of his life. And that they, as the parents who brought him up, need to know that he has a need they need to give him some kind of permission. They need to let him know that that's okay, to ask the questions he wants to ask his biological parents, and explains to them that, Terrell's footing has been uprooted. So they need to be solid and not be in a position to take ownership and say, well, this is our son. Where were you? You gave him up. Just be solid in this process of him searching and asking questions. Because in asking questions from the biological side of the family, that's him seeking to understand the womb that he came from, the womb that he marinated him, the womb of the things that are going on in his genetic makeup, and in his genetic predisposition. He needs to understand those things. He needs to be able to ask questions about those things, so that when they come up, he's not going to the adoptive parents and saying, why is this going on with me? And they don't have any answers. Because obviously the adoptive parents would not be the correct people to try and find out to try and sense make all these broken pieces of his, biological original life from his biological family. So again, that theme of the parents being able to give permission to their children to speak truthfully and authentically about the experiences, or at least inquire about the experiences that they are curious about, so that some clarity can be had, some answers can be found, some, missing pieces can be filled in, okay? So that's that. Iyanla said something to the effect of the adoptive and biological parents need to be grounded in sharing this, Terell, and helping facilitate him discovering his missing pieces. And what's interesting to me about this discovering and consolidating these missing pieces is that Terell still has a missing piece, which is, who is his father? Who is this man that his mother had a child with, which is him? Let me just go back to the initial story of, the mother. In the conversation with Iyanla, Terell shares with Iyanla that his mother had him at 12 years young, okay? And so fast forward into the episode, you realize that we learned from the mother, when she's now telling her story, that the mother was raped, was sexually assaulted and raped by a uncle's friend who was about 18, 19 years old. In the house, she was living with her uncle. This friend of the uncle was in the house. This man starts looking at her some way, and then obviously, and then sexual assault follows. That story, the whole entire episode, no one goes into that story, and maybe it might be perhaps because that's not the intention of this particular episode, but it's a big part of, perhaps, I believe it's a big part of perhaps why the mother gave up this particular baby. This baby was born out of rape. But then again, there's a question mark about, okay, he is 40, which means that his mom had him at 12, but he has a sister who was 1 year younger than him, and then a sister was 2 years younger than him. So this mom had him at 12, another sister at 13, another sister at 14. Was this the same man? And those children, were they given up? It doesn't sound like those children were given up, and it's only him who was given up. I'm not sure. And I'm not sure if they all share the same father, who was this young man, who was the uncle's friend, 18, 19 at the time when she was 12. So that's not clear, and that story, that's still a missing, for me, that's still a missing part of Terell's story. Who is this father who took advantage of an underage and sexually assaulted this underage young girl who was his mom? And that's still, for me, a missing part of his story. But for some reason in this episode, and perhaps the intention of this episode wasn't that story, it was about the mother. and discovering that story and unearthing and unfolding that story and assimilating that missing piece in such a way that it makes sense for him. Okay, so the next segment is that Iyanla meets with the sisters Alex and Angelisa, or Angelisha, and the conversation is about what was their experience growing up, because they didn't grow up with Terell. And Alex is the youngest and is younger than Angelisha. So Alex grew up with the mother, but Angelisha was sent to stay with the grandparents and grew up with the grandparents. So they both share their stories, and turns out the one who grew up with the mom, obviously the mom was still very young mom, felt, she explains her experience as desperate, abusive, running from CPS, and she didn't start school until she was in 3rd grade, and that it sounds like it was a difficult upbringing. And then the one who went to live with the grandparents says that I'm certain there's some guilt about how she was living with the grandparents and living a stable life and have had everything. But what comes up in her story, Angelisha, who lived with the grandparents, is that she was with her grandparents, had all that she had. She wasn't living in difficulty. She wasn't living in desperation. She wasn't running from CPS, yet she longed for her mother. She wanted her mother, and she felt abandoned and left by her mother, and failed in that way by her mother. And then you have Terell, who also is feeling like, well, my mother, I feel lost. I feel like my mother abandoned me, failed me. So each of them discovered that even though one never met their mother, these two knew their mother. One was living with their mother, one was living with the grandparents, but they all experienced the same pattern of and inflicting of pain, which is that they all experience a loss as a result of being abandoned, as a result of being failed in this way, of their mother not being present for them in their lives. Alex, the one who was with the mother, talks about the mother disappearing for days and then coming back, and so they all experienced abandonment in different forms. One was given up, one was sent to the grandparents, one was with the mother but kept on being left for days on end, was living in desperate conditions. And I thought that was interesting, that you always think the grass is always greener on the other side, because, well, at least you grew up with mommy and you had mommy, and I was missing that. And it turns out that our stories are the same, different frames, but our stories are the same. The behavioral patterns, experiential patterns were the same. That at the end of the day, because we had a young mother who was traumatized, and that trauma was not processed, and that trauma was not dealt with, that trauma was not healed, then she repeated this pattern of abandonment, of failing her children, of not being there for her children in different forms, ways, and shapes, to each of the children. So it doesn't make it better that some children were with her and some children weren't with her. Ultimately, the fundamental experience is that there was abandonment and that their mother failed them, because she was a young mother and she was living with unresolved pain and trauma, and as she was doing that, she was then projecting that in unhealthy ways to her children, in harmful ways to her children, in hurtful ways that caused wounds to her children. And Iyanla is sitting now with the sisters and the brothers, and they're all discovering this as they're busy telling their stories of their experience of their mom. And she's saying, I need you to understand that you're not talking about your mom, as in you're not talking about her behind her back, But what you're doing is that you are sharing your experiences about your mom. And she says, not talking about your experience does not protect your mother, it keeps her ignorant. And that had me thinking about what that ignorance is when you don't talk about your experience of your parents to your parents, is that it keeps them unaware of the hurt and the trauma and the wounds that they caused you. And it keeps them unaware, and then they continue to act in ways that hurt and harm and wound you in the very same ways because they're unaware and you're not communicating your experience. But it's so difficult. I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, it's so difficult. Who's going to facilitate that? Who's going to make sure that your parent doesn't just burst out and lose their mind when you're trying to have an honest and open conversation and connecting conversation with them? Just because you're at a place of, I want to connect and I want to be honest and I want to be authentic and I want to just share my experience of you while you were bringing me up, it doesn't mean that they're ready to hear it. Like I was saying last week, it's possible to have this process without the other person present within yourself. So you can share your experience with your parent, articulate and language your experience of the wounds, the hurts, the trauma that they caused you and how they made you feel without them being there, because you might be ready to have those open conversations at a time when they're not ready to hear the raw truth of those conversations. What I thought about, what came up for me as I was thinking about that is that, if you don't speak it, because she was saying if you don't speak it, you're not protecting your parent, they just remain unaware and ignorant of what the pain, the trauma, the hurt that they cause. They remain ignorant out of it. You're not protecting them. They just continue to remain ignorant and unaware and then continue to do it. But also, even if you don't speak it, you act it out. So you create all this distance, or you're angry and your parent is so confused about, why is my child so angry at me? Because you're not articulating, you're not languaging your experiencing of them that's wounding you, that's causing you hurt and pain. And I thought, I think there's no way of escaping. If you don't speak it, you act it, so either way, there has to be a way that you find in their absence or in their presence to be able to articulate your experience of your parents, and how they wounded you and how they hurt you and how that made you feel as part of the process towards healing. The younger sister is also kind of very angry and traumatized about the way that she was brought up. Like, she said there was all this running away from CPS, only starting school in 3rd grade, and just, all kinds of strange, like, circumstances. Mother just going missing for days and then coming back, days later. And it being difficult for her to register for school, because then that's how CPS would find them, and then they would have to be on the run again, all of that. And she starts kind of crying. And I found it interesting what Iyanla said. She said, let it out, because the sound of that cry is, it's not I don't know, a weakness, but it's not a weakness or a sense of losing control, but it's you, that cry and the sound of that cry. Give it a sound. And she said the sound of that cry is you finding your voice. I think that's a great perspective on letting out the sound of crying, that it's actually finding your voice, because it's this thing that's been compounded and compacted and suppressed inside of you. And it's almost like when it comes up, it's like, oh my gosh, and you start to shake and you quaking and you kind of crying like that. And also this gaining of the voice through letting out the cry is a process that she went through with, Iyanla went through with the mother, to say, one day you just need to take a moment and just go weep for yourself, and and she asked the mother if she wanted to do that at the moment, during the episode that she brought it up, and they went outside, and she kind of let out some of it. And it's true, it's like when you let out that cry, and it's all in its very raw and jarring kind of screech. To the ear, it sounds like, oh my gosh, something is horribly wrong. But actually, to the body, it's helpful, because everything that's been compounded and suppressed over the years and not been said and not been expressed then gets let loose. It gets let loose, and it is able to be released and unraveled and released out of the body. If you don't release it out of the body, it stays in the body, and then it transmutes into something else: a disease, a dis-ease, a discomfort, a pain, an ache, some kind of physical challenge that you develop, because there's some negative energy of unexpressed, suppressed emotions that you suppressed inside, and they're living somewhere. They're taking place and parking somewhere in your body. And if you don't express them, then you don't gain your voice, first of all, and then they make you sick, because you're not talking about what's really going on and what you really would like to have known, which is the truth, which is your experience, which is how it made you feel, and all of the above. All right, now the episode moves towards taking these feelings that have been by themselves. The children, the three kids, get to be able to gather their thoughts about what the experience was, and language that. And then they move from being able to language it amongst themselves with Iyanla towards being able to language it towards their mother. So now the next segment is with them meeting with their mother to tell their mother their experience, And, the mother is not too resistant, but there's a wall that comes up. There's a kind of wall that comes up, and there's a part of the mother that wants to somewhat defend or explain in the midst of the child is explaining what my experience was. It doesn't make you a horrible person, but I'm telling you what my experience was. And I like what Iyanla said at this moment. She asked the mom to just loosen up, and she said, listen to what your children are saying. And she said, give up the fight and let your kids get into your heart, instead of getting into defense mode and into, well, I did the best that I could, or were you not looked after? Did I not send you to your grandparents to give you a better life than I could? Did I not give you a way to get a better life than I could give you? And is this an attack? Is this an intervention? It's important. I think, just in that moment as a parent, it's just important to just hear the stories. And once you've agreed to come to the healing process, then that means you've agreed to kind of open up your heart to hearing things that are nice to hear, as well as things that are uncomfortable to hear and not so nice to hear about yourself. Feedback, a mirror back to your children. And in also doing that, I'm not sure if Iyanla asked the mother to mirror back to the children what she heard them say. But I think at some point there was a mirroring exercise where it's like, well, mirror back what you hear this person is saying to you about their experience of you. But I think that they did. And I like that, in that instance, especially when you've agreed to come to the healing process, then you need to come to the healing process, not there to defend, but to receive and let it go through you and feel it, and like, oh, this is what this person was carrying and feeling all these years. That was my stuff that I put on them, and now it's being given back to me, because it's my pain, it's my wounds, it's my healing, because I didn't process the fact that I was raped and I was sexually assaulted at the age of 12, 13, 14, and had these children, and I dumped it on them, and they marinated in this womb, and genetically, and as well as in the birth canal, it was passed on to them. But I don't want to hear it, and I want to defend it, when they're now telling me their experience about how they experienced me, which was that toxicity that I was pouring onto them because I didn't work out my pain, I didn't process my pain. Once you've agreed to come to the healing process, you got to be willing to give up the fight. That means you're ready to give up the fight. You get it. You're ready to give up your defense. You're ready to give up needing to be heard first and be understood first and your story being explained first before you hear what you did because you didn't sort out your wounds. How you bled all over the place because you didn't sort out your wounds. I like that she told her to give up the fight. You know, Angelisha, in this process where they're telling the mother of the experiences that, you know, I longed for my mother. Yeah, you sent me to the grandparents and I had everything I wanted for nothing, but I wanted my mother. I longed for my mother's love. There was nothing like my mother's love. My grandparents could not substitute that mother's love. And so she was trying to explain that there were circumstances that, you know, made it necessary for her to have to make that move. And this is where Iyanla then interjected and said, you know, give up the fight. Give up the fight and just listen to the feedback, and instead of trying to fight against it. The collective pain, even though they were like the circumstances were different, the one is given up for adoption, the one is sent to the grandparents, the one is was with the mother. The collective pain was that of neglect and being failed by their mother, you know, because she was young, because she had her own story that she was bleeding from, and therefore bleeding all over her children on because she hadn't resolved that pain. Again, it's just because the others knew and were around their mother, it doesn't mean that all was well, which could be the misconception of the one who was given up for adoption. You know, that, oh, well, at least you knew mother and you grew up with mother. It doesn't mean all was well. It doesn't mean it was all hunky-dory just because we knew our biological mother. And it just goes to show, like, whether you're growing up with your parents or you're not growing up with your parents, whether your pain is pain, and it happens if parents have not resolved through their own pain, then they bleed on their children, then they bleed on everyone around them, until they resolve their pain and they work through their pain and process it out of themselves and come and kind of move forward as healed people in the world. And I think it was very insightful that, you know, Terell said, when I came back into your life, you reverted back to the 12-year-old that you were. It was like the dynamic was that it's almost as if the mother reverted back to her 12-year-old in relation to Terell. And it just goes to show how much of her own pain she had not processed through. And once you don't process through your pain, you kind of get stuck there at that place where that pain was inflicted, where that pain violation was occurred, or whatever that broke you happened. If you don't work through it and you stay bleeding and you don't heal it and you don't face it, then you stay there. And the moment you come into contact with either something from that time or the perpetrator themselves or a reminder from that time, if it's not worked through, if it's not healed, then you just kind of revert back to that 12-year-old who was sexually assaulted and violated, and you're not able to respond to something from that time of the past coming at you now as someone who's now in a position of power, in a position of I am grounded, in a position of I am not broken anymore, from an unbroken position. And I thought that was interesting that he picked that up, that the mother reverts back when he comes into contact with him. And it's all because she had not processed through her own experience of her own story. And now we get to the mother's story. So like I said earlier, the mother's story is that the mother was the mother's story is that, you know, she was at the uncle's place. There was an older friend of the uncle's there, about 18, 19 years old. She was 12 years old. This man starts leering at her in an inappropriate way in relation to a young child. And then the sexual assault and the violation happens. And I mean, I think that's self-explanatory, really, and that story is very self-explanatory, and then it explains. And again, I think it's the part of it's important that we don't hurry and tell the mother's story before the children tell their story, because when you as the adult do not clean up your wounds and resolve pain from the past, and then bleed all over your children, and then marinate them in a womb that's broken, and then birth them through a canal, and then pass all that brokenness to them. When it's time now to have a healing conversation, because you neglected to kind of heal yourself before bringing children into the world, or heal yourself in a way that wouldn't harm your children while they are in the world, then you don't get to tell your story first before their children get to tell you their experience of you. And I think that's why it's first the experience of the children to the parents before the parent gets to ask for forgiveness for their children, as well as from the children, as well as to then tell them what the story was. The two moms meet in this conversation. I think the main point is that Terell wants both of them to know that you are my mom, biological mom, you are my mom, adoptive mom, you are my mom, and I don't want to have to choose between the two of you. I just want to create a bridge between the two of you, so that in me consolidating and sense making my own family, that I was adopted, but then I have this biological family, and I just want to create a bridge, and I don't want there to be some kind of contention and a tug of war of ownership between these two. Like, okay, maybe the adoptive mom might feel like I'm losing my son to this woman who gave her away, and then the biological mom might feel like, well, actually this is a person I birthed, and so you don't have a right to them. I have right to them more than you do. And this reminded me of that Kamaya story. I can't remember her surname. Kamaya story, the young lady who was stolen, and she was in this tug of war between the birth mom, who didn't give her away, but the child was stolen from her, and there was this confusion in her mind between the birth mom and the mom who stole her. And obviously their circumstances were different. You can now be trying to create a bridge between someone who stole something from someone, a child from someone. But here it's a matter of creating a bridge, making sure there's clarity, that everyone kind of knows their place, and that's his role to play, and not them to determine the mothers, but his role, because again, the adopted parents knew what they were getting into, and the biological mother also knew what she was getting into, giving her child away for adoption. So it's like, okay, then the child gets to decide, gets to facilitate, gets to bridge, gets to want to have access to both of you, gets to be able to try and broker for a relationship with you without you creating some contention of ownership over this child, because this child looks like their biological mother, so they see a mirror of themselves in this person who gave them away, but then they love this person who nurtured and cultivated them and brought them up. And neither one of those two can be negated in bringing together of the pieces of Terell's story and sense making, and also bringing to a place of peace the different pieces of Terell's story. And then the village comes together. The family, the biological family meets the adoptive family. So everyone comes together, and there's just a meeting. And there's obviously just conversations and just pleasantries. What was not talked about in this story, and perhaps that's not the intention that was set out in the story, because then it would have meant a 2-part or a 3-part of this particular story, is that the mother probably gave up Terell because of the pain of having to raise up a child from a rape situation. And also what did not come up is that having to raise this child of this person who raped you. That means you're raising a child of a rapist. And every time that you're looking at this person, at this child that has come into the world, it's a reminder of the day that you were violated. It's a reminder of the day that as a 12-year-old you were broken. It's a reminder of the day that you were wounded and harmed by someone. And that part of the story is not dealt with. It's not really spoken about. And I thought that was strange, that, as part of the mother's story, that was not brought to the table, and that was not light was not shed on that there's this valid reason of, hey, Terell represents this pain, and it makes sense in that twisted logic that, okay, this is too difficult to have to bear, let me give this away and not and erase it from my memory and not have to deal with it. But I don't know now who the father of the children that she bore 13 and 14 was. And if it's still the same guy, then why were those children not given up? That's the question that would come up. So there's some missing gaps there in this story. But I think, again, with each Iyanla Fix My Life story, there's one single intention that is established right at the beginning of the healing process, and that's the intention that is dealt with, one thing at a time. Obviously, this is a multi-layered story, and there are many pieces. There's the piece to the biological family, mother biological family, but also the father's biological family, but that piece was not dealt with in this episode. And that, but again, not the intention of the story. So, but again, that has me kind of concerned, because then is it not dealt with because Terell is denying that part of his story and of his life? Well, my dad was a rapist who raped my mother, so I don't want to have anything to do with him. Kind of denouncing that part would then be denouncing a part of yourself as well, that you came out of rape or sexual assault. And if you're denouncing your father who did that to your mother, underage mother, then there's somewhere, it lays somewhere that you've denounced that part, that genetic part, whatever that part that is your father inside of you. And that's my concern about that part of the story not being discussed in this episode. But again, I understand that only one issue can be dealt with at a time. So yeah, I have to say I really enjoyed watching this week's episode and also reviewing this week's episode. Like I said, again, I don't come here to do a blow by blow on what happened, but to just kind of reflect on different things that come up for me, revelations, aha moments, and light bulb moments that come up as I watch these episodes. Obviously, given a framework and a context of, I had this epiphany at this point of the story. So I absolutely enjoyed this particular episode. I think it's very much still within the theme of what I said. Probably this entire season is about children having those conversations with their parents about their grievances, about the experiences of their parents, and being able to have permission to have those honest, open conversations to create some kind of healing going forward and starting brand new relationships based on authenticity and true connection and truth telling and honesty. Thank you for continuing to come back to this channel and watch. I really appreciate you. If you are enjoying these reviews and all other content from the 5 different public playlists on this channel, please consider subscribing down below and helping us grow this channel. And also next to that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell so that you are able to be notified every time that I do upload something here on the channel and you don't miss out on anything. It is free 99. Please feel free to share with your friends and family that you might know would absolutely love this channel. Thank you again for watching. I appreciate you. I will see you again next time. Bye.